We'll hear from Indigenous leaders and companies about the ways that the 7 stages can be used to improve engagements and relationships for more effective Indigenous employment and workforce strategies in British Columbia.
At the leading edge of development are our values, which help define the process and pace of change. Development needs to be balanced with respect for the land, the waters, and the people who are looking ahead to future generations. Our values define us as a people and as a society. This is a time when we see many opportunities developing for British Columbia. It is also a time of complex political, social, and other issues which all have a bearing on the way that development occurs, how prosperity is realized, and how that's shared.
The Oka crisis is an example of what can happen when you have conflicting desires. On one hand, you have corporate desires for economic development, and on the other hand, you have Indigenous desires for respect for rights and title and protection of lands and resources.
We are still living in their house. We are on their traditional territory. That is the lens that the Indigenous people look through. You're still in my house that I never sold.
The ideal scenario for the corporations to incorporate this into their policies, into their operations, is for the corporation to take the time before any project or any goal that they may have that has to do with economic development and form those relationships first with First Nations, understanding that it's going to take a little bit more time to get to that goal. Things that remain consistent within Canada for First Nations is we stay close to home, and the plans that we make go beyond our own lives. They go generations down the road. So knowing that if you form a relationship with First Nations, tends to take a little bit of time to form that relationship, but once you do, you have certainty for such a longer period of time.
28 years after Oka, 22 years after the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and 3 years after the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we still have much work to do in closing the gaps, as illustrated in our research findings. Recently, Indigenous Works conducted a national study. The study included over 500 interviews and surveys with Canadian companies. Findings revealed that 85% of companies are disengaged. 9% consider themselves engagement novices. 6% have partnerships or relationships, and only 28% were aware of the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. BC's score was only 18 out of 100. Indigenous people play a significant role in BC's economy. Not only that, Indigenous engagement is simply not on the radar screen of potential employers. We do, however, see some sectors succeeding. These include forestry and mining. A more specific example is a relationship between Western Forest Products and Huu-ay-aht First Nation. This is a partnership that really demonstrates what meaningful engagement could look like and result in. On the other hand, we do see some sectors that are really struggling. These include transportation, technology, manufacturing, and retail. Indigenous people have so much to offer as a workforce, yet they're often overlooked.
At a time when Canadians are learning and talking more about reconciliation, we need to ask what companies can do to grow their relationships with Indigenous people. Doing so will create new value and new opportunities. But what's the best approach? What should companies be doing to position themselves for successful Indigenous engagements and partnerships which lead to talent sourcing and recruitment? What are the steps for companies to build employment partnerships? And what can Indigenous organizations do to help this process along?
Let's take a look at Indigenous Works' 7-part engagement framework.
At this stage, a culture of partnership is not yet developed in the company or organization. Partnership competencies and business case have not yet been built.
Indigenous people play a significant role in BC's economy, either as suppliers, contractors, consumers, employees, or employers. Yet they're often excluded from the opportunities that are available. On many reserves and settlements, we see high unemployment rates, often in the double digits. We also see companies facing an acute labor shortage. The good news lies within an old proverb, and that is, with every challenge, there's an opportunity.
If you look at the Indigenous community and the non-Indigenous community that are trying to come together, the non-Indigenous community is certainly trying to find a way to understand the Indigenous world. And it's so complicated right now that some are having a hard time trying to get there. They know they need to get there, but they just don't know how to get there.
I think what we need to do first is take a picture of where we are and what the needs are for both sides, not just from the corporate point of view. And I think that's an important part of the work that we need to be doing, specifically because working together, we can actually create that solution as opposed to trying to find each other. And I think that there are different stakeholders that will come into play, and they can be a catalyst to helping develop the strategy, develop the capacity that we're going to need. But having everybody at the same table at this point is going to be extremely important in terms of us getting to those solutions that we need to really take advantage of the positive benefits that we can have as an industry and as communities.
The second stage is referred to as strategy assessment and visioning. This stage is about identifying internal and external risks to achieving business plans and making a deliberate assessment about the role and opportunity for partnerships in surmounting those risks.
During stage 2, the partners are checking each other out. They're considering the risks versus the benefits of a potential partnership. Risks that affect potential or business feasibility include workforce availability and workforce development, project financing and operational success, and strength of the partnership. Companies need to ask themselves, what can we do to be proactive in building meaningful relationships with Indigenous organizations?
Being First Nations, we're really keepers of the land and the wildlife, right? Like, you know, we really look out for them, we protect them, we want to ensure that projects are being done properly, environmental strategies are in place, policies, procedures.
Indigenous employment organizations need to understand companies' mindset and needs. Will they make a good partner for employment? What materials do they have to market their organization as one which can source and secure skilled workers? Do they have case studies or examples describing their success working with other companies? Are they familiar with the jobs and needs of the businesses or industries approaching them? How do they convey their expertise in this niche so that companies commit to developing a partnership with a group they believe will deliver in the end? The third stage is about partnership readiness. Do companies or Indigenous employment organization have the skills and wherewithal to be a good partner? Each prospective partner needs to be able to identify the principles under which a partnership can grow.
We've all heard the stories of a company calling an Indigenous employment organization asking for 10 of their best carpenters. Well, the organization will likely reply that they don't necessarily have a bank of workers like that, but with a little bit of time and resources, they could put something together. Well, the company moves on because they needed the carpenters yesterday. And it's a lost opportunity, one which could have been avoided with some planning. If the company had done their due diligence in stage 2, they would have a good understanding of the Indigenous organization's realities. Being a good partner means being aware of each other's realities and co-developing an approach that can be accomplished together.
Our people as Nakaesli people are very hardworking people. We've always been that way. We're very honest people. We really believe in a strong education as well.
Economic benefits is always great, but also employment opportunities too, right? You know, we as much as everybody wants economic benefits, I think what people really want is employment and sustainability.
The fourth stage, partnership search and prospect identification, active marketing is needed. An attraction strategy pulls prospects to you.
So stages 2 and 3 are about understanding the risks and benefits of a potential partnership, but also having an understanding of the current realities of each other's organizations. Stage 4 does a deeper dive into these areas. We are looking at specifics in this stage: potential jobs and careers, training and certifications required, existing resources, both human and financial, and potential supports like training programs. This stage may include the development of promotional materials. You'll want to include Indigenous people within the materials and all forms of media for that matter. People need to be able to see themselves within the opportunity you're promoting.
I think the thing that differentiates BC from other provinces in Canada, I think has to do with two things. One, the First Nations themselves are taking initiatives on themselves to either get into treaty or develop limited partnerships. engage in a way that they're having an understanding there's approaches of economic development pairing with your value systems, and then at the same time you have a number of industries that are understanding that if you work with First Nations, it's of benefit to them. So they understand that if you work with First Nations, especially on large projects, you get to where you want to go much quicker than you would if you were trying to do it in maybe in traditional methods.
The fifth stage is where we talk about engagement. This stage is characterized by due diligence in assessing fit, further building cultural competencies and understanding of your partner's needs. At the same time, communities may actually want the jobs and business opportunities which companies have to offer. But they first want to have a structured discussion to determine whether and how the jobs and careers for offer fit with the community's plans. In Indigenous culture, there's a process by which they gather opinions, exchange ideas, hold discussion, and build consensus. So it takes time.
Stage 5 is often a stumbling block for Indigenous organizations and companies. At this stage, you want to avoid making assumptions. You want to get clear on the information. You want to reference guiding documents. Is there a comprehensive community plan? Do they have an employment strategy? Is there an economic development strategy? What's the business plan for the company that's approaching the Indigenous organization? You want to have a good understanding of these documents, and you want to be able to explore them at a deeper level. And not only explore them, but reference them. This is a good stage to find out what the community's decision-making process is as well. Engaging for job and business opportunities is the shared goal. Both companies and communities want to have a structured conversation to determine whether and how the employment opportunities fit with the community plan. Communities will want to engage in a consultation process with their members. This may take longer as leadership will want to exchange ideas, host community dialogues, and build consensus with their members. So this all takes time, and companies need to understand the value added that they'll get from going through this type of process.
Trust in my community around workforce strategies is, I want to know, like, if a person can come into my community and learn my culture, learn my language, and want to learn whatever, make a pair of moccasins, that's building trust. You're coming into my community. Come into our cultural center, speak to our elders, learn some of our language, and do beadwork. We have a lot of cultural activities on the reserve. So when we have a cultural activity, I would also like to invite the management and the leaders of the mine site to come in and say, okay, let's build trust.
Meaningful engagement takes time and includes developing cultural knowledge and competencies. This means spending time with your partner and getting to know them.
I think that we have some very good examples of where we've been and what we've been able to achieve in the past. Now it's looking at what is our next steps, where are we going in the future, and what kind of partnerships do we really want to build that will be mutually beneficial to all of our stakeholders, to First Nation communities and to our industry.
The hallmark of this stage is building trust as a basis for the relationship. But how is this conveyed at an organizational level? What do employment organizations look for, and what do companies come to expect from a relationship? The accumulation of social capital in a relationship means that there is good give and take, and that bodes well for results.
Stage 6 is all about building social capital. Building social capital is in alignment with the Truth and Reconciliations Commission recommendation number 92.
We look for partners that have got similar interests, similar cultural recognitions, because it's a two-way street too as well. We have to understand that if, as an Indigenous business, we have to also respect the fact that there's a way to do business properly in the world today, and we recognize that. And so there's some adaptation that we have to do on our side, but we're looking for the other side to be willing and able to adapt to our way, accepting our cultural values of how we do business too as well.
Don't worry. This can seem overwhelming at first, but you don't have to build social capital from scratch. There are a lot of documents and supports for you on this journey. For example, our engagement framework and guide.
What do these employment partnerships look like from Indigenous perspectives? How do companies look at them? How are the perspectives the same, and what are the key divergences?
In stage 7, the Indigenous organization and the company have spent time together. They have shared goals. They've built trust, both of which contribute to building a respectful partnership. Together, they've addressed their workforce challenges. They have systems and structures in place to support that success. And they're going to monitor and measure whether or not they're on track with their goals. Stage 7 is all about success. We are so fortunate to be living and working in a province with diverse economic opportunities. However, we need to face the facts that there is a real lack of meaningful engagement. This is evidenced by our score of 18 out of 100. In BC, we know that we have very high unemployment rates for Indigenous people, and we also have companies that are facing an acute labor shortage. So if we want to start bridging those gaps and closing the gaps, it's going to start with meaningful dialogues and meaningful engagement. And we need to take action. We all have a role and responsibility in addressing the labor market challenges that we face today. We need you to be a part of the solution. We need you to consider, what do the 7 steps of the engagement framework mean to you, to your company, to your industry, to your community, to your organization? What do the 7 steps of the engagement framework mean to your mission statement and to your values? We need to start having these conversations together and working together so we can start to see the positive change that we want to see. So I'll ask you to refer to your guidebook for additional information and suggestions. Don't worry, you're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of resources there. So in closing, I want to thank you for watching today. I just want to remind you, together we can create the positive change that we want to see.
So what the difference is really around cultural diversity, cultural awareness. We want to get to know the corporation, and the corporation wants to get to know who we are as a people as well. Sustainability, environment, safety, retaining our language, our health, our wellness are all important to us.
I met people. I spent time with people. I had tea with people. I went to a feast. I got to understand the people. I think the key to success in developing trust in people is really spending time. Doing what you say you're going to do at all times.
Kleko, kleko meetsu na ata.